when I had so much pain and when I was so sick and tired of being sick and tired that I started to ask for help. And it's at that moment where everything changed.
Do you think we can ever get to a place, a society, a time that men don't need to hit rock bottom, that we don't need to be in so much pain before we raise that hand for help?
I really hope so, Andy.
Hello, welcome to Real Men Feel. I'm your host, Andy Grant. This is the show where we explore the evolving face of masculinity and what it means to be authentic, open, and fully alive for men today. Today, I'm joined by Nick Johnson, a TEDx speaker, #1 international best-selling author, and a leading voice on executive mental health and male isolation. Nick knows firsthand how success on the outside can hide deep loneliness on the inside. In our conversation, we dive into the hidden struggles of high-performing men, the stigma around vulnerability, and how we can all build more connected, emotionally honest lives. And if you crave more real connection with other men, check out Authentic AF, my free online community at realmenfeel.org/group. You don't have to go it alone. Let's do it. Hello, Nick, and welcome to Real Men Feel.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's great to be here.
So, Nick, I really got to start with your start. What in your life prompted you to speak so openly about loneliness and isolation for men?
Well, it was out of desperation, actually. I went through a very nasty divorce 2015 to 18, and I grinded through that in isolation myself. And then I hit rock bottom. And it's from there I sort of came out of the ashes and rebuilt my life.
So you had a successful life, career, status, all the outward visibility of success. So what was going on inside you during those darkest times?
Yeah, I would say that, I was in a job that perhaps was a bit bigger than I was ready for. I had pushed really hard. I wanted the promotions. I wanted the bonuses and everything else, and I pushed for it. But I wasn't open. I wasn't vulnerable about the parts of the job where I fell short. I was doing really well in business development, in the sales and so on. But the back office, the numbers and so on, I wasn't on top of. But I was too scared to ask my boss for help there. And that eventually led me to making some mistakes and eventually my resignation from a job that I loved and a place where I should have stayed if I had the gut to ask for help.
Why do you think so many high-achieving men in particular struggle with vulnerability and asking for help?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andy, and it's something that I keep asking myself as well, because in that particular job, I actually knew the boss very well. I was home at her place on Sundays having barbecues. We were quite open with ourselves. And she was also hiring me twice in my life. So we had a very good open relationship. However, I focused the conversations on making sure that I looked good. I focused on impressing her and making sure that she felt comfortable, knowing that I had her back, that there was no problems with me. So I just didn't feel safe to open up and asking for help. Instead, I tried to impress her, and I did the same behavior with a mentor. I had a mentor also who had 10 years more experience than me in the company, and I did the same with him. I tried to impress him, making sure that, I would get the next promotion, that I would get the bonuses. And again, I was too scared to open up to him about the challenges. I thought that maybe if I share this, then maybe I'm not going to get the next role, which is I want. And I think it's also an issue of how society is set up, because I really elbowed my way sort of up the corporate ladder and everyone is playing the game and no one actually of my colleagues even was vulnerable. So it's at least in the companies I worked, it was the company culture that was set up for this.
So what finally happened that had you crack open and share yourself?
Yeah, it was only after I had resigned, and after I had resigned from the job, people started to ask me, Nick, why did you resign from this job? You're doing well and so on. And I didn't give them any honest answers. It was due to my insecurities because I started to have panic attacks thinking that I'd done something wrong. But in truth, it was the challenges of my insecurities that led to resignation, nothing else. But I didn't want to share that, so I said that I'm going to start up my own business. I'm going to invest in some startups and so on, and I painted this picture. And once I then found myself outside of this paid job, yes, I did invest my money, but it also was poorly invested and I lost everything. And I almost ended up bankrupt. And then due to that, also filed for divorce for my ex-wife. We had a marriage of 13 years, and when she started to question me, I wasn't ready for any conversation. So if that was how it was going to be, then I filed for a divorce. That's easier than explain myself. And then I basically, for 3 years, just jumped from job to job and kept failing everything, and drinking more, gaining more weight, until I found myself basically at what I call rock bottom. And it's from there, when I had so much pain and when I was so sick and tired of being sick and tired, that I started to ask for help. And it's at that moment where everything changed.
Do you think we can ever get to a place, a society, a time that men don't need to hit rock bottom, that we don't need to be in so much pain before we raise that hand for help?
I really hope so, Andy. And I know that you also are talking about men, and you're talking about men to be more open and so on, and creating safe spaces. And that's something that I do in my part of the world as well. I spend most of my time in Southeast Asia. I run a men's group where we share and we practice to being more open and vulnerable. We practice getting some trust between us. And we can build up these vulnerabilities in normal times. It doesn't have to be when it's a big life crisis. One example of this, in my men's group now, there's one man who just lost his mother this week. And of course, it's heartbreaking for him. But he says, thanks to him being part of this group for 3-4 months, where he already sort of opened up, he is now opening up. He's sharing with me, he's sharing with the men's group, he's sharing with his wife, he's sharing with his sister. He's talking more, not only about the logistics, but also his feelings and acknowledging the feelings of others. So I do believe we can do that. We need to be proactive, Andy. We need to have these safe spaces and offer them and encourage men to learn to speak about their feelings.
Yep, couldn't agree more. And I know sobriety was a big part of your journey. So how did getting sober reshape perhaps your approach to leadership and even masculinity itself?
Yeah, so sobriety is a big thing in my life. It's almost like my second birthday, because it's really a different way of living for me. And it's twofold. Firstly, then I actually learned to ask for help through one of the 12-step programs, which is set up for that, where you then get support by someone who's been there before. And it is in those rooms that for the first time in my life I heard men being there was women there as well in some of the meetings. Some were men's groups only, but where people actually were honest. They spoke about their challenges, the mistakes, the failures of their life without shame and guilt. And I start to feel safe to then take ownership for my mistakes in my life, the issues that I had been facing, and what have happened to me. And step by step, I started to share. So that was really what happened then, that I started to open up. That was the one thing. The second thing, of course, being more physically and mentally healthy and emotionally healthy has made a huge impact on my life as well.
Yeah, I know in my experience, for me, what made me open and share more was that the first time I did do that, I wasn't mocked. People didn't run away. You know, that was my biggest fear. If someone knew how badly I felt, that they would just flee. They'd run for the hills. So is that kind of, was that one of the powers of a men's group, giving you that practice that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the men's group, typically we perhaps share what is most challenging one-on-one first. And these days also I'm a coach and a mentor to some of the men. So some of them I have a one-on-one conversation with them first, prepare them and get them to practice and be comfortable just sharing with me. And then typically I ask them if there's someone else in their family or someone closer to them they can share it with. Perhaps it's a friend, perhaps it's a wife or a brother and a sister, that they can share whatever challenge they're going through and talk about it. And once they've done that, perhaps they then over a week have spoken to 2-3 people. Then on the next men's group meeting we have, I say, would you be ready now to share that? And that's typically how it goes. It's quite a big step for someone who perhaps is new into a men's group to come in and share some of the biggest challenges they're facing if they haven't done that before. And that is more common than not, I would say. The most men that I'm facing, and most are Europeans or from America, but working as expats in Asia. That's my circle. And they have perhaps moved away from the family and then keeping the distance and not used to being open and vulnerable with them.
So what are some other unique pressures and challenges that male executives have that most people probably don't realize?
Yeah, I believe, being an executive can be quite lonely, especially these days. There's so many changes in the workplace. There's so many insecurities. There's so much disruptions, and therefore you never feel safe. So that is the biggest issue I believe in with today's work. Gone are the days when you work 30 years for a company and get a gold watch. You always got to watch your back. And I think that drives that kind of mentality that I had also, that I wasn't vulnerable. I was just making sure that I was succeeding, and I kept it very tight and clean and tidy. But behind the scene, things were falling apart. And that is what I see with many, many leaders. They look solid, they look strong, they look like they have it all together. But when you actually ask them, but then there's just so much at stake. Maybe they have loans and everything else on house, cars, and then they have children in schools. They got to pay for all of this. And if they lose the job, not only do they lose the job, but perhaps they have to pull the children out of the school they are in. Maybe they have to sell the house and downgrade to an apartment. And I've seen so many families then falling apart with divorces as well. And then comes perhaps coping mechanisms and addictions into that, and then it's a full circle.
So you have kind of lived life from both sides, from wearing the mask, letting everyone think you're fine, everything's going great, and all, or should I say, it sound like many of your interactions at work were focused on what you presented. And you've had the experience of being open and vulnerable. In either of those, did life become easier?
Yes, certainly. I mean, when you're trying to do it all yourself, when you're putting all the bets on yourself, then it's very, very challenging. You have no rooms for errors. Everything has to be perfect. And that's why perhaps we work ourselves, too long hours, weekends, sacrificing work over everything. Maybe also, not becoming too close to any friends and colleagues. That means you isolate yourself in the workplace. And that has a lot of downsides there. Then on the other side of it, my life now, having learned first in the recovery program to ask for help and being vulnerable there, I have brought that across to the other sides of my life. And one example is in triathlon, the sport I did before, where you swim, cycle, and run. I was mediocre there, and I struggled, and sometimes I didn't even show up to the start of the race. These days, though, I fully embraced it, and I said, well, what about if I apply the same mentality as I did for my other areas of my life when I recovered into the sport, which means signing up for a club, having a tribe where I have other people who do the same sport, getting a coach, someone who give me a training plan, someone who can mentor me and show me how to do it properly. And I've done all of that for the last few years. And I'm truly, truly enjoying the sport, getting better, but most importantly, also feel completely socially connected rather than isolated.
Nice. What can the workplace do? What can corporate environments do to combat this sense of isolation?
I think the best is to lead by example. They just have to be a bit vulnerable and open themselves. And that doesn't mean that we have to come in and share all our secrets and challenges in the office. That's not what it's about. But it's about taking ownership perhaps for some of the insecurities and failures and being open with the team. And in my case then, where I should have been open was that I'm not very good at numbers. I'm not very good at Microsoft Excel. We were bidding for a lot of projects. Things were moving very fast. I couldn't really keep up. If I would have been vulnerable about that, I don't think anyone would have judged me. But it's another thing coming in and sharing, some major personal problems we have. Maybe we can keep that to a men's group or to a therapist or coach and working on those insecurities, or to our friends outside the workplace. But there's certainly some things that you should be vulnerable with inside the workplace. And that is, as soon as you feel that this is overwhelming, I'm not really sure about this, then think about who can you ask for help.
And that's a good distinction to make, because we're not suggesting, men, you should be crying in meetings and be all over the place and be an emotional mess. But I find that if you don't share all of you somewhere, then you're more likely to have that kind of that public breakdown, and all the emotions that we compress will eventually come out of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my case, I wasn't ready to face it. So I rather resigned from that job, which was something I was thinking about for about 1 year. I drafted my resignation letter about 6 months before I handed it in, because I shouldn't actually have resigned from that job. I was doing a good job. In 95% of my role, I was doing really great, but it was those insecurities that killed me. And and to the point where I couldn't hold it together. And that's an expensive learning that I just hope that I never have in any situation. It doesn't matter if it's a relationship or if it's a workplace or something we do. We got to think and ask ourselves, am I feeling okay here? And if not, who can I talk to about this?
So you have an international clientele, it sounds like. Do you see cultural differences around the world in how men both express loneliness and hide it?
Yeah, I would say in Asia, then I would say that Asians are even more closed than us Westerners. We might be a little bit more outspoken. I see that in everything from the 12-step programs and so on, there's just so much stigma to show up and to even admit that you have some issues or challenges in Asia. So they are hiding even deeper. So that's why for myself, then working in that part of the world and the region, I got to be a role model by showing up and sharing what happens when we do share. And that's what I did in my book, Executive Loneliness, where I interviewed executives and leaders and entrepreneurs, mainly in Southeast Asia, about their isolation and feelings and so on. And then what happens on the other side when we do open up. So I think there's a long way to go, definitely a very long way to go also in Asia. But otherwise, it's the same feelings of isolation. If you're in a workplace where you don't share and ask for help, then it doesn't matter where in the world you are, you're going to feel lonely.
Right. No matter where you go, there you are. So about the book, Executive Loneliness, what's been the most surprising or meaningful reaction you've gotten to the book?
Well, I wrote it, when about 1 year into my recovery. So I was already feeling quite well at that time. I was 1 year sober. I lost the weight, and I had dealt with my issues. I worked with a coach. I spoke to a therapist, and all these kind of things had been happening. But then something happened that changed my life and triggered me to write a book, and that was that I sadly lost a friend of mine to suicide. A man from the UK who worked in Singapore at the time, someone who I worked with and someone who I thought had it all together. But when he was gone, I was so sad, heartbroken, and also I felt that if only I knew that something was going on. And then I started to think about asking myself the question, how close was I to this? Because at my lowest point, I wrote my will, I wrote my testament, and I basically started to plan for my own funeral. I wasn't suicidal, but I couldn't see any future. I didn't have any hope. I didn't really care if I would wake up or not. So that's the sort of gray zone of life I was in. But then having come out of it 1 year, feeling much better, looking back at it, that's when I realized there's a lot of work to be done here. And that's when I opened up fully. I made a LinkedIn post at the time that went viral, where I signed up for a suicide prevention agency as a founder and volunteer to reduce the stigma of then asking for help and suicide prevention. And at that stage, then a lot of media exposure happened. I was on live TV, radio. There was newspaper articles from all around the world coming in. And with that, then everyone said the same thing, Nick, you got to write a book about this. So that's what I did. And the biggest surprise was, I think, how well it's received and how good it's selling still today, 4 years after its release.
You mentioned that line that I say and hear often of, I thought I had it all together. And I find that that's the biggest mask that men wear. I've got it all figured out. Everything's fine. Don't ask me anything. And it just keeps that false distance between us and everybody that could make our life even better. How do you think we might help more men drop that mask?
I think what you're doing today here, Andy, with me, that we're having this open conversation, the fact that we talk about it, where we've been and others been, and how it can go. Because ultimately, if we don't have this conversation, then we might end up like Simon, my friend who died of suicide. And sadly, it's all too common. We all have lost friends when it comes to this. So that is what lies at the end of it if we don't talk about it. But keep speaking about it, keep showing up like you and I do today, having these conversations. And for anyone who's listening, think about who can you talk to? Is there someone in your life who you can be honest and vulnerable with about your challenges? And if not, think about who can you talk to, because then there are coaches, there are therapists, there are also all these helplines and hotlines, and what I found was that alcohol was my challenge, and it was a wonderful world of recovery all around the world around that. But what I now know is that it's equal as good if someone is struggling with gambling or drugs, or if there's any social media addictions, food addiction, sugar addiction, all of these issues, someone else has been there before and have these issues. And I even found out now that they even have these 12-step programs for people who are facing bankruptcy, or someone who might be having a company that is going bankrupt, because then the stigma of discussing for that and sharing that is something that's difficult. You even have these programs, and they don't charge. These are volunteer programs, help where people are giving back and helping. So there's some support for everyone there to speak up.
Yeah, and longtime listeners, people that know me know this, but I'm a survivor of multiple suicide attempts in my teens and 20s, and it's a lesson I needed, but that's why I came out of the emotional closet and trying to combat the stigma around this, because men shouldn't have to face the end of their life to decide that, okay, I'm supposed to be here, right?
Mm.
I find that our life is meant to be joyous. It's meant to be exciting. It's meant to be seen as adventure. So now, when I think that guy's got it all together, I remind myself, oh, a lot of people said that about me. So anytime I think that, I'm like, it's probably not true somewhere in his life, and that's okay. And in fact, that's a good thing. We all have areas that we can grow, and if we didn't, I don't think we'd still be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I so resonate with what you're saying, because many of the coaching clients I have now, or I would say the majority of them, are very well off. Perhaps they are CEOs of big companies, or they've done really well financially for themselves. On the outside, everything looks absolutely perfect. But as soon as you start speaking, as soon as you build up a little bit of trust and understand what's going on behind the scene, it's really, really, really the opposite. So it's almost like the better it looks on the outside, the more dirty it is on the inside. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I think it's a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. Comparison is the thief of joy. So when you find yourself comparing someone, because that was the issue I had. Anyone that I learned from, any mentor, coach I had, put them on a pedestal. Couldn't imagine them doing anything ever wrong, and so I had plenty of people that I followed fall off that pedestal. But if I realized they probably don't belong on the pedestal to begin with, that would have probably helped both sides of that relationship a lot.
Yeah.
If there's a man listening now who feels isolated but is still in that place of fearful of reaching out, fearful of saying anything, what would you suggest as the best, easiest possible first step?
Yeah, I would say the first, think about if there's anyone at all. If is there a friend who you can start to be a little bit vulnerable with, and perhaps you don't have to go the full length and sharing all your secrets right away. The best would be to start, and I talk about the vulnerability muscle, start practicing it. So from your conversations moving forward, just start opening up step by step. When I went through my difficult times, my divorce and the resignation of the work, and when I fell down, I had fantastic friends around me, but I was not open and vulnerable with them. I played golf with them. I went to the bar with them, drank beer with them, watched sport at the pub with them. And I saw it as a place to, relax and have a good time. But I didn't speak about any of the challenges. These days, though, my conversations with my male friends is different. They are also deep, vulnerable. Yes, we still have a good time. I went to cinema with one of my good friends last night, but after that, actually, we walked outside and we sat for a while. We had a deep, honest conversation about life, and asking him how's he doing, any challenges in his life now, what about his family, and so on. And we just ask a couple of questions. Then we are strengthening the relationship. So I would say that's one advice if there's no emergency. If there's a real emergency and we have to speak about something, then I recommend what I said before, then professional services, helpline, hotlines where there's volunteers or therapists or coaches. And most of these, including how I work these days as a coach, is online. So a lot of the work can be anonymous. It can be during a lunch break or during the weekend. So no one has to be seen to seeking these kind of services these days.
Yep. And I'll share. Like, I have called suicide hotlines and gotten a benefit from it. I have had to put myself into an ER to make sure I'd stay alive, and that's okay too. The biggest mistake I find is somehow believing you don't belong here.
Mm.
So, Nick, I wonder, what's one thing that you wish more men knew?
And I would like to tie that back to what you said, because it's about belonging. And I mean, the opposite to loneliness is connection, and that comes from belonging. So I believe that we need to be proactive as men to find places to belong. We need to belong in places where we feel that this is a space for me. Like in my case, it's triathlon, the swim, bike, and cycling. So I'm doubling down on the sport of triathlon because that's my tribe. I show up to swim academies, I run with them, I cycle with them, I do trips with them, and so on. But for someone else, it might be that they love fishing. Then double down on that. Perhaps there was someone who's listening who enjoyed fishing when they were younger. Then the last 10, 20 years, they stopped it. And I would then encourage everyone to bring out those hobbies again, sign up for a community or a club or an association who who provides, perhaps trips, some gatherings together where you can then be with like-minded and do what you love. So you have that place to belong. So you have that tribe, and I think that is something that we need really to be taking a responsibility for ourselves, because no one else will do that to you. When we were children, our parents drove us around typically to test different kind of sports and activities and so on. But then we become very busy with our adult life and work, and then we stop those services. But my call to action is to everyone to look out for those places where they belong. And it can be sport, but it can also be men's group indeed. If someone is listening and don't belong to a men's group, perhaps look for one in your area.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said for this entire interview, Nick. So I feel like a kindred soul. So, Nick, what's the best way for people to connect with you and learn more?
Well, I'm quite active on LinkedIn. They can look me up there, and it's Nick Johnson, Nick, and Johnson is spelled Jonsson. Otherwise, my book Executive Loneliness is on Amazon. It's also on Audible as an audiobook.
Well, thanks so much for being here today, Nick. Thanks for your journey. Thanks for still being here. And thanks for all the work you're doing to help more men stay here, be themselves, and enjoy being themselves.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Andy, and thanks for the great work you do, and thanks to all the listeners.
Thanks for listening to Real Men Feel and this powerful talk with Nick Johnson. If his story resonated with you, know that you are not alone, and you don't need to suffer in silence. Take a moment today to reach out, check in, open up to a friend. And if you're looking for a safe, supportive space to do that with other men, join Authentic AF, our free community at realmenfeel.org/group. Stay real, stay connected, and until next time, be good to yourself.